Hey guys, so you can't see this yet, but behind me is the PowerPoint for aptitude assessment, and this week we're also covering career assessment. I used to do this in separate places. I'm going to start with this one, and then we'll switch over to the next one. Some of this is actually redundant too because of the way I've taught it before, and frankly, I was too lazy to just make it into one PowerPoint. So actually, it's not that I was lazy; it's because I want to keep them separate for an intentional reason, which has nothing to do with this. So. Um, Regardless, let's jump into this one and we will start talking about it. And then I'll skip over a few things that are just going to be redundant. And we'll still try and keep this under an hour. So, what the heck is aptitude? We've thrown around that word a little bit, and I've kind of explained it in class just a tiny bit. But when we think of all the things that go on in our brain, we have the parts of our brain and parts of our mind, and they do a lot of complicated things, right? So when we think of our intelligence, we haven't talked about this unit either yet. That's going to be coming next week. But intelligence is made up with all kinds of things. What we did talk about is achievement. So I'm going to break down a few of these different things and kind of stick to this up here a little bit more, but I want to introduce concepts that we've covered before. So we've talked about achievement. What have you been able to accomplish up to this point? If you've learned how to count numbers and you've learned how to read paragraphs, achievement tests should measure all of that stuff. Like I've achieved up to what I'm supposed to have been taught in 11th grade. Like if I've been through 11th grade, I should be able to achieve the competencies expected of an 11th grader. That's kind of the idea, right? When we're talking about abilities, that's kind of the same thing. It's kind of the same word. And this is why it's a little tricky talking about this stuff because all the things that go on in our head, we will here. In fact, let me just skip forward here. All these things like arithmetic, it's almost, I can't even say it right. Arithmetic reasoning, this is a bad example. Verbal reasoning, numerical ability, abstract reasoning, all of these are like kind of sub competencies, so to speak, that have something to do with our intelligence as well as something to do with our abilities, right? So we're talking about a lot of different concepts, and it's a little bit tricky to learn this stuff. Part of what makes it hard is that when we say you are smart, we talk about book smarts, we talk about street smarts, we talked about what you're able to do, which is not quite the same thing as achievement because just because you can count doesn't mean you might just voluntarily not do your tests and not pass a grade because you just haven't achieved that grade, but you have the ability to do it. And there are some situations in which that happens. So there are nuances here and there's lots of different terminology, but I'm going to try and keep it as simple as I can because if you follow the KISS method or keep it simple, stupid, I want you to be able to kiss this stuff. I'm just kidding. That's a bad joke. I try sometimes and just I can't win them all, right? But I want you to be able to keep it simple, right? Because it's a lot easier to understand that way. So what we can think about is we can think about achievement being relatively close enough to abilities or what people are capable of doing at this moment. For those of you that are school counselors and working more with achievement tests, you may need to differentiate that a little bit. In terms of aptitude, what we're talking about is future capacity, the potential to perform a task. When we talk about tests like the GRE or the SAT or the ACT, essentially what those tests are not measures of how smart you are. We kind of think of them that way because high school kids are like, well, you got this score and I got this score. That means I'm way smarter than you. But that's not really what they do. What they're supposed to do is predict future success in school. So if it's the SAT or ACT, it's predicting future success in undergraduate education. If it's the GRE, it's future success in graduate school. If it's the LSAT or MCAT, it's future success in law school or med school. That's kind of what they're made for, right? So they're aptitude tests, essentially, even though we've covered them in different capacities under achievement chapters and that kind of thing. You see how these things kind of blend together? It makes it tricky to learn. But essentially what we're talking about is future potential. That's the idea. In order to measure that future potential or aptitude, what we're trying to do is capture both what acquired knowledge do you have right now? Like what are the things up in your head that you know that you can recall and do something with? And then there's this other stuff that's a little harder to capture, like innate abilities. So I'm not going to say too much on the typical on exactly what those mean, just for the sake of time. But oftentimes when we're thinking about why do we need to know somebody's aptitude, well, we want to know about, can they do well in graduate school? Will they be good at being a tank mechanic? Which we'll see an example of military aptitude tests in just a second. Will they be able to perform the job that I want to hire them for? So I'm going to give them an aptitude test to see if they can even do it. Google's famous for this one, and a lot of other software companies. Google had this problem in the 2010s sometime where they were like, we can talk to somebody about who they are and they can tell us about their achievements, but it's really hard to tell just because they pass school whether they can actually perform the tasks. So they somewhat famously now they give real world coding problems to potential software developers that they're interviewing for their program to say, do you have what it takes to do the coding in our company? And they don't give them actual, sometimes they're real coding problems, but they're just sort of hypothetical kind of critical thinking problems. Show me that you have the aptitude to do it when it comes time to actually using our software, because they're not going to show you the software until you're hired, because they got to make sure you s- sell them your firstborn son and give them your blood and whatever first, so you don't take their proprietary knowledge. But aptitude tests are important for a lot of reasons, especially hiring too, which will that this theme of how are these tests used, the theme of hiring will come up again here a little bit too. So here we go. This is called the ASVAB. I had to take this when I was in high school. Some of you probably will remember this from your high school experience. But basically, the military says, well, if you're going to go in the military work is not quite the same as civilian work, and so we're going to give you a different kind of test for the unique jobs that are involved in military work. So I don't want to go through this whole thing for you. There's some details in here, but essentially, the reason I'm doing aptitude tests and career tests is because I already mentioned the thing about hiring, but a lot of these are really used to see if you have the capacity to do a certain kind of work. So in the ASVAB, they care about all these things like arithmetic reasoning and general science and math knowledge and all that kind of stuff. But they're also using a thing called the Holland scores. And I'm not going to, most of you who have been in Ola's career class will probably remember these. I'll give you a brief overview when we get to the next part of this. So like within this hour, I'll tell you about what Holland scores are. But Holland scores essentially are a career personality tool to help you understand, am I a fit based on the things I like? If I like spreadsheets, I might like being an accountant. But if I hate spreadsheets, I'm gonna have a real hard time being an accountant, right? Like if I love painting and creative thinking, I'm not gonna do a good job as a forensic investigator or something like that. That's kind of a dumb example, but you get the idea. We all have things that we like and don't like, and that determines a little bit about our satisfaction or, dare I say, happiness at work. So the ASVAB, like many other aptitude tests, will both consider what kind of person are you, kind of personality like. This is sort of like that innate abilities thing I was talking about earlier. And then what are you actually capable of doing? What's your potential, future potential for being able to do these kind of tasks up here? So that's one. Here's another one. Oops, did I miss one? No, I didn't. I'm going to skip over this for now and explain it later when I get to the career stuff because I think it'll make more sense there. So just hang tight. Here's another one. Um, one thing I guess I should say is this is typically for high school students entering the workforce. So this other one that we're going to talk about, this is more designed for career counseling. Employee selection, as I kind of alluded to, this one's not really for high school students. It works better for choosing employees for a certain kind of job, or at least historically has, which is changing a little bit depending on the industry, as I mentioned with the Google thing. This one you can give in groups of people. So there are certain circumstances in which you will only interview one person at a time and give one test at a time. Other situations, you might do group interviews. I'll tell you my favorite story here, even though it'll take up a little bit of time. One time I went, this is like directly after I graduated with my undergraduate degree, and I packed up my Volvo in the middle of December in Minnesota, and I was like, all right, I'm done with school. I don't know what to do now, so I'm taking off. So I took my car, packed up all my crap in it, and moved to North Carolina. And I literally drove down there to Asheville in the mountains, in the Smoky Mountains, and I slept in the state park in my car for the first night. And then I like had to go find an apartment. So I went to the local university to I think it was like Asheville Community College or something, and like looked at their bulletin boards, found an apartment. The next day I went out and went job hunting. And I had worked at a few restaurants, I had cooked at a few different places, so I was like, "Oh, I could probably do that, and it's easy enough to find work." So I walk into Applebee's. Was it Applebee's? I'm pretty sure it was Applebee's. I walk in, and this very enthusiastic, almost kind of obnoxiously bubbly guy was the general manager or something. He came out, he shook my hand a couple times, gave me the side eye, and then he sat me down with this test. I had no idea what it was. I didn't know why I was doing it, but I was like, all right, I guess whatever, I'll just do it. And I took the test. He gave me a smile, shook my hand again, went to the back room, came back a few minutes later, knowing what I know now. He was just grading the test, and he came back out and he said, I think we're going to go a different direction. And that was it. So I failed my first aptitude test for a job as a cook at Applebee's. So, which I think is one of my favorite stories of my life. And then I went next door to Olive Garden, and they hired me on the spot to wait tables. Which, as it turns out, I'm a very bad waiter, very bad. I spilled a glass of iced tea on a guy and got a 1 penny tip. If that gives you any indication of how this goes for me. But anyway, hopefully my current job is going a little better than that. But for those of you in class, you can let me know otherwise if that's the case. Anyway, tests like this, the one I took very well could have been something like this, which I doubted for cook work at a restaurant. But those are more like, can you take direction? Can you take rules, or can you follow rules from authority figures and that kind of stuff? Which maybe I'm not that good at. That was probably the reason, I guess. I don't know. But either way, um, one thing you'll notice is that these themes of words and numbers, it comes up a lot, as well as things like mechanical reasoning and spatial relations, that kind of stuff. Because the more you think about it, we haven't really talked a whole lot about it in this class specifically, but the more you think about all these separate skills that you use in your day-to-day work, the more you realize that, oh yeah, even though I'm a counselor or therapist or I'm an accountant or whatever it is, I still have to be able to understand how objects are used in space or think about those things. It might be a stretch for us therapists, but nevertheless, um, these themes are used a lot in different kinds of work. So I'll leave that there for now. The other one to know about this one is it can be used for exceptional learners, like people on the upper scale of intelligence, that kind of thing. So something to think about if you're developing a gifted program for gifted students or something. This could be an option. I think there are a lot of new tests that probably use the similar stuff, and these might be outdated. So I don't really know about that because I don't use these in my work. So I'm gonna just give you the brief overview here, but I would suspect that even though I'm giving you these as options for tests, somebody who's used to this stuff and does it routinely probably will have some other ideas, whether these are still relevant or whether they're outdated and there's a better one now too. Uh, Here's another one developed by the US government for state employees to match applicants. Both the military and the federal government and state governments are the biggest employers in the country. And so they have a vested interest in helping place people in different kinds of work, given the unique kind of work that state and federal administrations do. So there's that. A lot of commonalities here. One I'll point out that gets used quite a bit in my rehabilitation counseling work is clerical perception or clerical potential, because that kind of clerical work gets used by a lot of us, and even more so now than it used to. Back when things were, we're talking like, I don't know, 75, 80 years ago, when more people worked on farms or in factories, manual manipulation was a lot more of a thing than it is today when we do use a lot of information. Even the people that work in restaurants and like at cash registers, so much computer work, so much thinking and intellectual work goes into those. So there's just a lot of that stuff. So clerical work is a really important thing to evaluate. There are a couple other here. These are the CAPS system involves 3 different kinds of assessments. I'll save this also, these different kinds of assessments, but these are the 3 categories, and basically most, if not all, well, I'll say most career assessments is you when you're assessing career, you want to know what somebody's interested in, what they like, what they're able to do, because you can like to be a potter, but if you are terrible with coordination, your hands aren't going to make good pots. So you kind of want to know, do I like it? Are you good at it? And then does it fit the kind of person you are and the values that you have and the lifestyle you want to live? That's important too. So the CAPS system has an individual scale called the CAPS, then the COPS and COPES too. So we'll talk more about that one, I think, when we get to the career chapter. And then this career ability placement survey, again, more of very similar categories of things that are being tested here. So we'll leave that one there. Here are just a list of a bunch of other different kinds of specialized tests. The general clerical test revised. If you ever need to use one of these, this is just essentially a list of them. So I'm not going to go through them. A couple different clerical tests. In terms of mechanical ability, sometimes this is more relevant to those of you doing career assessment, specifically rehabilitation assessment. So I guess I'm not going to talk a lot more about this because the stuff at the bottom is like finger dexterity, manual dexterity. If somebody has a hand injury and they used to work as a mechanic, they might say, well, I don't know if I can do that mechanic work anymore, but I want to do this other job. You think I could do that? And so we test their ability to use their hands and say, yep, you could probably do that one. Or that one's going to be hard. And maybe we can get some specialized tools, or maybe we just have to say there's a different direction we have to go. So we'll leave that one there. Aptitude gets used for a lot of specialty areas as well. So I imagine this list is long, much longer than what I have here. Textbooks get published slowly, and innovation is happening a lot quicker than the publishing industry and a lot quicker than us scholars learn about things too, and then write books about it. So in terms of surgical training, I'm sure there are wild tools that allow surgeons in school practice to see, do I have the ability or the aptitude later on, the potential to do this. One of the things that I saw in a movie when I was a kid and it made an impact on me was it was like a TV movie back when you had to watch movies on TV, and it was about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and I think that guy in history was like a medical doctor or something. And when the constable, or what do you call him, detective, was running around looking for the guy and sort of putting together the clues, he went up to the guy driving the stagecoach and he said, hold out your hand. And the guy held out his hand and he's like, see, still as a surgeon. And the idea here and the relevance to what we're talking about here is that the aptitude has to do with your ability to have steady hands. Because if you're a surgeon with shaky hands, probably not going to go over well when you're slicing through someone's aorta. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. So if you do that with a virtual reality tool to say, could I go through and practice the moves of a heart transplant or something? And if my hands are too wiggly, I don't have the aptitude to actually perform the task. And so doing that in virtual reality, a lot better than doing it on me. I'll tell you that. Artistic ability testing, musical ability testing, driving simulations, all these kind of fall into that category of aptitude. And I already mentioned this stuff about admissions tests, so we'll kind of breeze over that. Cool. Okay, well, we made good time through that one. Let me pull up the other one here. We're kind of already in the territory of career assessment. So I'm going to tell you a few little caveats about this chapter in the book, and then we'll kind of continue on this theme a little bit. The direction for career assessment. So I told you this, and it's less relevant to you guys in this class, but my background is in rehabilitation counseling. A lot of that means helping people with disabilities find work. And one of the things assessment is helpful for is knowing, can you do this work? Are you capable of it? It's one thing to look at somebody's high school transcript and say, well, you did really good in science, and math, so maybe you could be a land surveyor. Maybe that's a good fit for you. You don't have a hand, so you can't continue to be a motorcycle mechanic. But if you went back to school, got this degree, you could be a land surveyor because you don't need to use your hands to manipulate objects a lot to be a land surveyor. So maybe, right? But there is more that goes into being a land surveyor than just math and science. That is a way to do it, but using special tests can be really helpful. So anyway, I'm off track just a little bit, but this chapter focuses in a lot more on this idea of human resources and helping move people through getting them into the right kind of work a little bit faster. Companies, especially really big ones, have a vested interest in saying, well, we have a lot of different kind of positions, and we really want to make sure we have a good understanding of the team, not just are you able to do this kind of work versus that kind of work. think think Amazon. Some people are doing some coding, some people are working in the distribution facilities, some people are drivers, some people are managers, so there's a lot of different work there. But the other idea is that you want to learn a little bit about a person's potential to work as a team member and that kind of thing. So using assessments can help in the HR process. It doesn't, we in our rehab world use them, but the other primary place is either in high schools for school counselors, for people going on to college or going on to careers. That's a big one. People going into a certain kind of job. So that's a career related kind of thing. And then in rehab counseling as well for people that get disabilities at some point in life. So I mentioned these earlier. Career assessments have essentially three different parts, and I already kind of listed out what those were: interests, abilities, values, and sort of the relevance there. So I'm going to move through those so we can have more time to talk about other stuff. Most of these career assessments, they look at these three categories, and what they say is, based on what we know here, how do we match a person up to a job? And there's a whole lot more that you're learning in the careers class with Ola in terms of like, my character traits meet the needs or the factors of a job. That's kind of the foundational theory. And when we're talking about career stuff is trait factor theory. Do my traits match the factors that are required to do the job? So they're all essentially matching. If you think of like I don't know, OK Cupid or Match.com, and you know, what's the Tinder one where you're swiping? All you're trying to do is match up people with similar interests, likes, and values, and that kind of stuff. It's the same concept here, only you're not speed dating human beings so they can have hookups and the relationship can end in a night, which is how they get used sometimes. But it's really trying to make it's so the I'm fumbling my words here. I think I got myself distracted. That happens sometimes. Um, you're not trying to create jobs that somebody can go to for a while, get dissatisfied, or not be able to actually do the job. You want something that's going to be long lasting and sustainable, just like what I think is the intention of some people. I don't know how many, but you go to try and find a partner, either online or in person, however you do that, or to make a good fit. Because you want to have a good experience with somebody. You want to have things in common. Anyway, um, okay, so apparently I do need to update this a little bit because some of the course numbers are different. That was from my old program. So I guess my excuse of not being lazy, now I officially am lazy. Sorry. um, but this should be the careers class. Let's see what else. Oh yeah, last point here. I have this pet peeve about career assessments because a lot of people's introduction to career assessments went something like this. You fill out a bunch of Scantron bullet point things from somebody in high school who said, we're going to help you find the suitable kind of work for you, or what would be the best job for you. And you get back this printout or some kind of results or something, and they say, here, this is the best work for you. And then they're like, for part of your assignment, go on the internet, do some research, and then figure it out. And that's all you get, right? It's not career counseling. It's not somebody helping you through the decision making process and helping you avoid pitfalls and much more of the complicated process. So career assessment just gets used in a way that I think scares a lot of us away or just isn't helpful. I know that when I was in my graduate program, we used this one right here, the strong interest inventory. And the strong interest inventory is really helpful and fun to look at. And they did the same thing. It was like, well, you could either be a counselor, which made sense for a lot of us in a counseling program, or you could be a bartender because you like talking to people. It's just a different educational level or educational requirement level. Or that I forget the other one, but there was another common one. But it was essentially like, well, okay, but is that it? Does that mean I'm pigeonholed into being a bartender or a therapist for the rest of my life. And it just felt like it wasn't really understanding the nuance and complexity of a human life and the choice that we have in it. So it's kind of my pet peeve when that sort of stuff happens. Here again is a bunch of detail about some of these different things. I have a bunch of copies of the self-directed search. I never really got. I should have. I'm kind of ashamed to say this, but I should have learned this and I should have been trained this. But it's very popular and it's been used for a long time. Although I think people are moving away from it, maybe. But we have copies here at Whitewater that you can take and use if you want to learn this one. I'd love to learn it with you too. So if you're thinking, I'd like to help somebody find a job, especially use school counselors, I'll do some work with you to figure it out and walk through it. Strong interest inventory, that's the fun one that I can show you in class. If we get around to it, I'll show you an example of what that looks like. Um, I'm trying to see if I want to say any more about that. Oftentimes the good ones, the good tests, they'll say, here are the jobs that seem like they'd be of interest to you. And then here's some future resources to learn more about those kind of jobs and stuff. We probably won't get into it too deep, just given the nature of this program, but I will geek out on that stuff for a long time if you let me. So just careful which doors you open with me, because I will talk about that for a long time. Online resources for more information. But I will withhold. I have the capacity to self-manage sometimes. And then the Campbell interest and skills survey, honestly, I know nothing about it. So I don't know what to say except for what's in the textbook, which it requires a post-secondary education. One of the challenges with people at the higher end of the educational scale is that there's just a lot of different kinds of really nuanced and unique work. It's like, how do you assess for somebody to be a CEO? Well, there's a big market for people who will, consultants who will come in and do leadership assessments with a leadership team to see which of the underlings has the most potential to move up into the CEO chair later on. But there's not a lot of really good large scale assessments because it's not a large scale problem. So there's a lot of this kind of like, there are some tests for people who have college degrees or higher for college degrees or higher careers. The strong is kind of meant to be like that. It's not necessarily like you have a high school degree and here are your options. It's more of a for professionals with some college. And then there are some more like this that are like for those who have had graduate school or something like that. So here's the Holland scores. I'm going to assume that you probably have learned about this in other classes, so I'm not going to go into it in great detail. I'm going to go through it really quickly. But essentially the way it works is that anybody who takes a test based on the Holland system or the Holland theory, if you will, you'll get a 3-letter number or 3-letter code or whatever. So for example, see the numbers right above, or the letters numbers. See the letters right above my head? They say RIASEC in that hexagon. I had to think for a second. A couple weeks ago, I used the word pentagon for that thing, and someone was like, Pentagon has 5 points, dummy. This one has 6. So I was like, well, I mean, I did pass high school, but I didn't get all the points. So it makes sense. Anyway, once you take a Holland-based test, you'll get 3 letters in return, and they'll be any combination of these 3 letters. In other words, if you have really strong realistic traits, your first letter is going to be an R. If you also have strong realistic traits and then secondary social traits, you'll have the letters RS, and everybody gets a code of either 2 or 3, depending on how strong you identify with any one of these 6 things. It's really normal for therapists to be, for any one of us, if we were to take this, a lot of you would score SAI, and S being, get out of the way in here. In fact, let me do this. S being social. Social are the helper people. I know this is really small to look at, but social people are those who like working with humans, other people, essentially. So anybody who works customer service, anybody who works as a therapist, a counselor, social worker, psychologist, even people who work in sales and retail kind of fit this category. It's just like basically people work, nurses, doctors, that kind of stuff. Creators are people who are artistic, and it's not just the painters and the sculptors of the world or like the graphic designers, but people who work in marketing, um, people who work we as therapists often are coming up with very creative ways to treat different unique conditions. So for example, if somebody comes in and says, I love putting together model airplanes and I'm super socially awkward and anxious about going out and meeting people, and we're like, well, okay, well, let's come up with some, let's not just talk about that, let's come up with a creative solution. What if we did some practice with the model airplane club? Maybe you send an email to the guy and ask for some information about how the club works and that kind of stuff. So this is kind of a silly example, but the idea is that artistic people are not just those who do art, but it's anybody who uses creative thinking in their work. Investigative, these are like detectives, problem solvers, that kind of thing. Realistic people are the doers. These are people that work with their hands, plumbers, construction workers, farmers, that kind of thing. It's a lot of more of like sort of manual labor kind of stuff, a lot of counting and using rulers and tape measures and that kind of thing. Conventional people, the most quintessential example is like your accountant, the kind of people who love data and information and love categorizing and organizing things. And then enterprising right up here are your salespeople, like to persuade others. These could be attorneys, um, car salesmen, anybody who works in retail essentially does a lot of this, like leading and performing and that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's just a really quick overview. And so if you ever use the Holland scores, you'll use this hexagon essentially, and you'll learn how to interpret and read those the three-letter code. I'll show you some of that in class too, as we get closer to that. Okay. In terms of other career systems, here are here are some of the names. Um, well, actually, let me see something real quick. Oh, okay. So we're talking about work values here. The one thing I'll say is that if you learn this Holland system, you will know probably 80% of all career assessment systems, because a lot of them, they look a little different, they administer a little different. Some are online, some on paper, some take longer, some are shorter, but they a lot of them will give you a Holland code or three letters as a result. So if you learn this, you'll know a big chunk of what you'll need to know in order to do career evaluation. So this is really, really helpful. In terms of testing, what you need to know for like NCE testing or something, there'll probably be a question about the Holland codes or the Holland John Holland himself and like what that means. What you should know, just sort of on the big scale, is that the Holland code is a career personality assessment. That's essentially what it is, the gist of it. So the other part of your interests, what do you like to do, which is how you get Holland codes, is say like, well, I like to work with people. Okay, well then you probably identify strongly with a job where there's people in it, right? Also work values, and there's a few different assessments for work values. I'm not going to go through the names of all these, but you'll do some of that in other classes. But work values are really important because you can find out what person, I don't know, like what kind of work they like to do. Let's just say I'm talking to you guys and we're doing some career evaluation. And we say, okay, so you have the Holland score of SAI, and that puts you in the category of being interested in being a therapist. Okay, good job. Now you're here. You know that now. um, I don't need to tell you like, okay, go do research on being a therapist. And your question is, well, how do I know what particular work site is going to be a really good fit for me? Because some of you want to go out and be kind of entrepreneurial and start your own practice and say, well, I don't mind doing a little bit of administrative work and some billing and a little bit of marketing and kind of convincing people that they should come see me because I'm a good therapist or whatever, like that kind of marketing stuff. Some of you have a little more of that entrepreneurial spirit or that conventional like stuff too, of tracking data and information to make sure you can pay your taxes accurately. You know how many billable hours you have for the month, that kind of stuff. Others of you are like, no, thank you. I don't, that's just not part of my value system. What I want to do is I want to help people heal their souls. I want to make sure that um, people who don't have money or opportunity get the same services that people with money do. It's my value to work with people on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. Other people are like, I want to make as much money as possible because I want to be able to bring my family on vacations. I never got to as a kid. And so it's one of my values to provide for my family. So uh, another example it would be something like it's really important for me to have freedom and independence in the way that I work. I just don't want to be micromanaged. So if you go into an interview and you're unaware of your values and someone says, "We run a pretty tight ship here. You know, we have a computer system that we would need you to learn. We'll take care of all the scheduling for you, but you just need to operate within that." And if you're like, "Well, I really have my own system that I think works a little better," there might be a conflict there, a value conflict. And so knowing your values can be a really important thing, not just for individuals, but even big organizations that say, well, our mission and vision say we stand for these values. And everybody, the underlings, are all like, ugh, well, that's the standard language that CEOs always have to say, but it doesn't really fit what I want for the company. Sure, the company wants to innovate, but I just want to learn my job and go home. See how values really play an important role here in the career process? So there's a bunch of different ways to look at those. I'm not going to go too deep into it because we have the other class and we'll do some activities in class to talk more about this too. This is one that for those of you who are thinking about your own careers now, what I like to do and what I might do for an activity is I'd like to talk to you guys about how you go out into the world and find your first job as a therapist and a counselor, one that really fits the way that you want to work the best, or at least gets you closer to that place. Um, so that's good enough for this one. Um, we've talked about choosing among applicants of a job. A lot of this is pretty relevant, I think, mostly for people who are doing rehab in my former life, part of my current life and my former program that I taught at. So I'm gonna skip over that part for now. Job analysis. Do I want to even talk about that? I'll tell you what a job analysis is, and then we'll be done, and we'll kind of cut this one a little bit short this time. A job analysis, when we talk about matching a person to their career, it's one thing to match a person to a specific occupational category, like helping professions or like a counseling itself or social work or psychology or whatever. It's another thing to then look at our values and say, well, what kind of work site would you like to work at? A private practice, a big agency, that kind of thing. It's a whole other thing entirely to say, well, what about this specific job right here with those specific people in this specific geographical area? A job analysis really does that. It's sort of like pinpointing with a fine tooth comb. What does this job do? Another thing about it is it may help understand not just this job, but help define a category. So I could give a human being an assessment and say, this is what kind of worker you are. I could give the job an assessment and say, this is the requirement of the job. In other words, this can be really helpful for employers to say, how much of the time I need somebody who can, just take an example from my life. I used to work in a pizza restaurant. I need somebody who can uh, put ingredients on the pizza. I also need somebody who can work at an oven at high temperatures. And I need somebody who can fold boxes. Just 3 tasks you do at a pizza restaurant, right? And smoke weed outside behind the dumpster. I'm just kidding. It's not really a thing. Um, it never was at the place I worked at, although I question some of the places I've got pizza from before, but that's a whole other story. But those 3 tasks, those are things that an employer would say, I need to know how much time people are spending doing those tasks. So when I put together like what do you call it? A job posting. If I am asking for somebody to work, I want to clearly define what this job is going to be so that they know if they can meet those requirements. So doing a job analysis is one way of saying what what is the nature of this kind of work. That's kind of the purpose of it. Um, so I think that's it. So I'll leave it there, and this is kind of a bonus because you get to spend a little bit less time in front of the screens, which I'm sure you guys are going to be welcoming at this point in this semester. Next week, we'll talk a little bit about intelligence assessment. That one will take a little bit more time, kind of the average amount of time. So take a few minutes if you can. I know there's only our typical time is an hour, and we're at 40 minutes right now about. So take this 20 minutes, and if you can, I'm going to give you an activity to think about. Well, no, I'm not going to give you an activity to think about. I'm just going to let you go, and you can do whatever the heck you want with this 20 minutes. Use it wisely. Rest. Take care of yourselves. I know you guys are busy and doing a lot of stuff, and part of counseling is taking rests and not just doing the work, but also setting yourself up to do the work later. Athletes have to perform on the job, and they have to rest when they're at home so they're ready for the next job, and that's what you guys get to practice too. So, all right, I'll see you guys in class. Bye bye.